All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's episode one of the Decolonize Your Mind podcast. We're going to be diving into just how dystopian the American healthcare system is. The the entire system that we currently have right now, I truly believe is a dystopian like nightmare that couldn't even be imagined. I mean, I think it is imagined. If you look at the Orwellian society, it kind of more ties into I think the book by George Orwell ties into mostly topics about just the surveillance system of like Big Brother. That was kind of more the prediction, but to be honest, I really don't even care about that. I'm not like a big. The data issue is a big issue. It is a big problem, but particularly when it comes to the disparities of healthcare in America, one of the biggest problems that we have is the massive amounts of price gouging for basic healthcare necessities. If you look at the issues that took place when it comes to the advent of insulin, even the person that discovered insulin, this shit pissed me off, right? I'm okay with people scamming, if it's like a bank doing some bullshit, the stock market crashing, insider trading, okay, I don't care. Yeah, you're messing people's livelihood up still. But when you start playing with people's health, like people that need insulin, and you're now price gouging by 500x, like you're marking up some damn crypto pump and dump scheme, it's like, Jesus Christ. Where's the humanity? Like, I'm okay with you scamming other bankers or scamming people that want to put money in the financial markets. Like, if you want to gamble your money, go ahead. Okay? But the lack of informed consent when it comes to the people who need these treatments, these necessities to facilitate their existence on this earth in a functional and productive way, you charging them exuberant amounts of money for no reason, just so that shareholders can rehypothecate that money into other things, whether it's war, or rehypothecate that money into different things, whether it's like casinos and all of the other fucking money laundering bullshit that they do. It's asinine to me that we sit here and we don't realize how people who need these things, people who depend, their existence depends on these necessities when it comes to healthcare, particularly insulin, are being robbed. And I would talk about this sometimes, and people, it's like it doesn't really click in people's head, especially when you put the numbers out there and you just look at how many people are suffering from certain ailments. And then if you just extrapolate it out and look at how many people are probably dying because of these ailments, it's it's fucking crazy. Like, it's actually dystopian as shit to realize that millions of people are dying every single year because of the fact that the United States is basically held liable, or is liable for human rights violations, because they don't actually do what these universal human rights laws are stating, that they're not really allowing us to have adequate healthcare systems or an adequate living, even for people who can't afford it. And especially if you look at the statistics of people who are going bankrupt because of medical debt, nearly 30 million Americans are uninsured, and medical debt is the leading number one cause of bankruptcy. Medical debt is the number one leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. And you mean to sit here and tell me the United States is not liable for human rights violations? It is absolutely fucking crazy that we have millions of people who are swimming in debt, not only because of the education system and how they package that debt into student loan asset backed securities, and then rehypothecate that money into the stock market, into all of these different index funds, so that the rich continuously get richer. But then you then enslave the younger generation with medical debt. You enslave them with credit card debt, or not medical debt, but you enslave them with educational debt that usually doesn't even really cause their earning potential to increase, based on the different studies that took place in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, based on the cost of living. Now, getting a degree basically doesn't even really help you out that much, based on all of the other things that are happening with the economy and inflation. So then you couple that with the increased cost of living, you couple that with the fact that you slap them with debt to get a degree that doesn't even really increase their income like it would have been previously. And then on top of that, most people are most likely to get some sort of chronic disease or ailment. So then you slap medical debt on top of them for them to even be able to get through it. So then they're riddled with all of this debt. And then debt also becomes a stressor in and of itself, causing this massive negative feedback loop, where the more things that happen to the person on a physical level, then it then affects their mental health, and then their mental health then affects their physical health, because of the neuropsychoimmunological system that our bodies have. When your psychology is disrupted continuously, whether it's emotional or family trauma, whatever it might be, emotional stress, then signals to your body that you're physiologically being stressed. When in that case, it may not be the case, but our minds are exponentially more powerful than I think that we've been led to believe. But if you really just look at this from this system from a top-down view, if you look at all of the bullshit that we're being fed from literally the second we're born, based on our mitochondrial inheritance from our mother's also being stressed and probably fed with all of these seed oils, fed with toxic food, EMFs all over the place, probably got a phone right to the head, all of this toxic stuff with vaccines that people want to debate about and say whether it's pseudoscientific or whatever it might be. Either way, it still needs to be studied, because there were actual cases in human history, particularly in American history, where vaccines were used in a negative way. I'm not even saying that as someone who's like entirely anti-vax. When I started to look at the reason why people were anti-vax, it kind of is like you can't really kind of just say, oh, it's all bullshit. No, there's actually historical events that took place that caused people to actually be skeptical in the first place. If there was no reason for them to be skeptical, then there wouldn't be this big fuss up about vaccines. But that's another point. So that mitochondrial inheritance that comes from your mother from the first place, you're already cooked the second you get born. That's why you see all of these childhood ailments and diseases, because mitochondrial DNA passes through maternally. So your mother's giving you a bad foot to start off from the jump. All that generational trauma, especially if you're from an indigenous background or a melanated person, and your mother's probably already been stressed based on transgenerational epigenetics. So all of the things that took place during slavery and the emotional trauma and the emotional stress that took place was literally inside of her DNA, and her mitochondria adapted, and then she gave that to you. And then on top of that, all of the environmental stressors that have happened ever since the Industrial Revolution, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to non-native EMFs, when it comes to all of the food and all of the emotional stress that took place, especially with people of color or indigenous backgrounds. So then tie in all of that. From the second that you're born, you're already dealt a bad hand. Then all of the things that are progressively happening from there are causing your body and your physiological systems to deteriorate. And then from there, you're basically being indebted with debt to go to school. You're basically in indentured servitude. So then now that you're sick and the things are finally starting to catch up because of what all the stuff that we just listed before, you're basically a walking money machine for these corporations, because now they're prioritizing profit over a cure and a lot of preventative medicine in general. And again, I'm not going to try and dog out the medical allopathic community in this video, but it's really just to point out how the fact I really truly believe that the United States is liable for human rights violations based on all of the things that we're seeing. The fact that millions of Americans are uninsured, and that medical debt is the number one cause of bankruptcy. And all of the things that we look at when it comes to, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the International, let me look at my notes, International Covenant of Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. That is what is literally the foundation of my argument against the fact that the United States is liable for human rights violations, because we're supposed to have the capability to have adequate levels of physical and mental health. If you look at what's going on in America, I think the largest consumption of antipsychotic drugs is in America. The largest consumption, I think it's almost like 2 to 3 times, like 2/3 of the country is on antipsychotic drugs. 2/3 of a population is on antipsychotic drugs. This is why I think America's cursed, first of all, because it was started. This is a prime example of karma. America was started by a whole bunch of batshit crazy people in the first place that came here. Now the whole population is literally 2/3 of us are on antipsychotic drugs. And then this is exacerbating the issue, as we talked about, with neuropsychoimmunology, and how our psychology and the fact that if we're all stressed out, super anxious and depressed, is then going to have downstream effects to our physiological systems, our bodies, our kidneys, our hearts, our lungs, and all of these other things that are literally causing us to be sick, right? So when you look at what the United States is doing, it's already not even aligning with that standard of making sure that we have adequate health mentally and physically. Because if it was the case that we had adequate mental health, 2/3 of us would not be on motherfucking goddamn antipsychotic drugs. And then second of all, the price gouging that has taken place, as we talked about earlier, is to me, the number one issue that I have. Like, it's literally robbery, and it is causing people to die, because if you look at the people that are being marginalized and priced out based on these exuberant prices that they're charging, because they're just basically scamming people, if you look at all of that and you think about how many people could not afford it because they basically were poor, and now you have hundreds of people who can only afford it because they have access to the systems that are allowing them to get the treatment, then you have to think about the people who ended up dying either of other comorbidities that they might have had, or other ailments that they had during their like if they needed insulin, they might have had another disease or whatever it might have been, and that might have progressed faster because they couldn't have afforded insulin. And if you look at what some of the laws when it comes to human rights violations, or the human rights when it comes to the international level, when it comes to having people that have the capability to afford these things, it should be a right for you to be able to be healthy, especially when it's already affordable. It's not like we're talking about insulin's this super difficult thing for people to afford and for people to create. Like, it's not like this massive nuclear reactor that we need to build. It only costs a couple dollars per vial, and the person that created it wanted that shit to be free. So then now it's hundreds of dollars. So then if it's hundreds of dollars, and the laws and the government policies that are allowing this to take place are happening under the United States, oversight, then the United States is liable for human rights violations, because you now have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, if you take it over the past, few years that the insulin, ever since the advent of insulin, if you just look at all of the different people that were affected and probably priced out, then you can then say like, oh shit, all of these people might have died from XYZ not being able to afford this, or then they were their standard of living decreased because of the actions that were taking place under the oversight of the United States government. And I really do believe that insulin and the price gouging portion of things is a component of that. But particularly when it comes to the amount of money that's spent to lobbying and advertising, particularly when it comes to big pharma and the opioid crisis, which I 100% believe they're also liable for, is another reason why the United States is liable for human rights violations, because again, that is under their sight, that is under their oversight, that is based on the things that we allow in the US, and some countries don't have that. And a lot of people like to sit there and pedestalize the United States, and it's not all entirely bad. But when you really look at what's happening in the United States, it's a lot of propaganda that makes people believe that everything is sunshine and rainbows, when you really look at the fact that most Americans are suffering financially, physically. Like 2/3 of us are getting chronically ill. 2/3 of the population is in financial turmoil. Another 2/3 is also on fucking psychotic drugs. So we're mentally, physically, and financially enslaved. We're mentally, physically, and financially enslaved. And we're running on this rat race to continue progressing society at the cost of massive waste that is literally toxic to our bodies, the forever chemicals, the plastics, and on top of that, all of those chemicals that are then going into the agricultural systems like the ocean, or wherever we're producing, like avocados and oranges in Florida or California. Then you take a look at all of the acid rain, which then messes up all of the other subsequent systems downstream. And this is the part that I really believe is going to be a very, very unique problem that we face over the next 10, 20, 30 years, potentially when I get much, much older. People are going to look and say, what the fuck was going on in America? Like, why did we allow this to get to the point of no return? Not only from like whether you want to talk about climate change, but literally people's physical and mental health, particularly with incurable diseases like cancer, certain autoimmune diseases, and things of that nature that cause us to reach a point in the society where we're breaking. And I think I'm starting to see more and more of it. People are starting to realize that this shit is not natural. This many people should not be sick. If you look at the advent of certain ailments, whether it's autoimmune conditions and certain, I think, bacterial conditions, like related particularly to a Western diet, especially the rise of Industrial Revolution, they're very correlated, just based on all the things that we're putting in our fucking environment, from the food, from our devices, all the way down to what's going on mentally and the things that we consume. And to me, it's absolutely crazy. So just kind of going back to the point of the U.S. being liable for human rights violations, the next thing that I could say is really how chronic illness is profitable. So chronic illness, particularly, if you look at a business concept that a lot of people like to talk about, is called LTV. LTV to CAC ratio is lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. And a lot of these companies also function on a lot of these same tenets and these business practices and these KPIs, key performance indicators. So if you have a company that's main KPI is increasing the LTV, which is your lifetime value, and the company happens to sell pharmaceutical or medical things that cause people to, alleviate their symptoms or kind of really increase quality or standard of living with people that have these symptomology or certain indications. If you look at what the fuck's going on, these people are the LTV statistic, the lifetime value. If you increase the LTV of a person from the time they're 20 to the time they die, you have a lifetime customer. And guess what? You also have their children, based on what we know now about maternal mitochondrial DNA and how all of the DNA that you get is coming from your mother. So if your mom's sick, she's most likely going to pass it on to your kid, which is why you see early childhood diseases. Because a lot of what we're studying right now and a lot of the percentage of spend with research, whether it comes to cancer institutes or clinical research, is being spent on our genetic, like the DNA versus the mitochondrial DNA. So it's studying the human genome. But if you look at what's actually pushing a lot of cancer treatments and a lot of cancer therapies, like a doctor named Thomas Seyfried, that talks about cancer being a metabolic disease, particularly with the metabolism when it comes to ketosis and ketogenic diets. How that ties back into your mother passing on that sickness and LTV of these companies, the lifetime value, is that if we're studying the wrong things like the human genome versus the mitochondrial DNA, and moms are passing down their damaged dysfunctional mitochondria to their children, then once the company has the mom already as someone with breast cancer or whatever it might be, and they pass it on to their children, they have that dysfunctional mitochondria or whatever it might be, and now their children from a young age, even at like 10, can be sick. And now the kid's going to be basically another LTV statistic where the kid's now on this medication for 50 years. So when they probably do their financial projections and their forecasting and whatever these pharmaceutical companies, they're probably looking at their acquisition rates of how many new people are using their medication, which is entirely related to other parts of the capitalistic system, which are destroying our environment and destroying our physiological system. So if you're somebody who's getting sick because of what's happening to the water or what's happening because of the lighting industry or the technology industry and how they're pushing all of these blue light screens or these non-native EMFs when it comes to the cell towers or laptops, and that there's circadian mismatch and dysregulation that's popping up, all of a sudden now you're super sick and the companies are profiting off of you being sick like into perpetuity, because it's this massive feedback loop. Everything around you is making you sick and causing you to get sicker and sicker. And then they can look and say, well, XYZ disease is rising over the past 20 years, and we anticipate, based on the financial models and AI algorithms that they most likely use, they'll extrapolate out the rate in which people are being diagnosed for certain diseases and ailments. And then on the back end, they'll have these clinical research companies and trials running all of these different studies to see, okay, what are potential ailments, how much is it going to cost, all this R&D shit. And then from there, once they get all that information, the pharmaceutical companies can come up with another product and then sell that based on what they believe is going to be the highest demand in the market, which is literally just people getting fucking sick. So if people are getting sick, it's good business for them. It's literally good business for them when people are getting sick. And then they can also sell another treatment that's going to address the symptomology and most likely not even really prevent the thing in the first place, because preventative medicine at its core is completely counterintuitive to a capitalistic model. They'd much rather treat symptomology or use things that are going to allow you to keep having to either buy again and buy again and buy again. And it might even be a proper ailment. I'm not even hating on all of allopathic or the medical community's scientific discoveries. It's more just like at the end of the day, we live in a hyper-capitalistic system, and the laws that are functioning in America make it that we can literally just keep causing people to get sick and into perpetuity charge them to get the cure or the ailment, because they'll just end up having to come back anyways for some other shit. And don't even get me started with all of the different all of the different things that pop up when you start to take the medications and the ailments that pop up when you do start to get sick, basically, like when you start to take certain medications, all of the side effects. So it's like, damn, it's a massive storm that's causing a massive feedback loop, in my opinion, that's causing us to get sicker and sicker. But yeah, for the most part, I really believe that the United States is dystopian when it comes to how bad we failed human rights violations. The next topics are probably going to be something a little bit more up to speed, a little bit more up tempo, so that way we don't get depressed talking about this dystopian system. But Yeah, just some of the solutions that I think that people can do is really just taking their health into their own hands, really educating themselves about the human body outside of a dogmatized perspective. You know, looking at supplements that really support the human body's capability to detoxify, that are natural and don't have too many adverse side effects. For me, what I've realized is really, really beneficial is vitamin C, in particular whole complex vitamin C. And this is when I also started to realize there's a lot of dogma when it comes to like science, particularly when it comes to biochemistry or some of these fields. Because if you look at what's taking place with particularly vitamin C, like if I said vitamin C and I said whole complex vitamin C, some people will be like, well, there's no difference if you just take ascorbic acid. When if you actually look at the makeup of whole complex vitamin C in nature, it's surrounded with all of these different bioflavonoids and different vitamins like vitamin K, and it's in a box basically. When you look at ascorbic acid, it's literally the ring. And then if you look at all of the studies that we do, particularly when it comes to like medical research, all of the studies are done with just ascorbic acid. And then they'll be like, well, there's no point whether you take I can't even say the fucking word, ascorbic acid or not. They're going to be like, well, it's not a big deal. When really, if you took vitamin C in its natural form with things like camu camu, which is one of the highest concentrations of vitamin C out in nature, which is down in the Brazilian, southern Latin America, it's a completely different effect. But they haven't really done studies like that. They did a small study with smokers using camu camu, and they found very, very positive indications when it comes to inflammation, and a whole bunch of other indications of chronic inflammation, particularly when it comes to smoking cessation. But other than that, people will just be like, well, vitamin C is the same. And that's when I realized there's some dogma with that, because I don't even know where that really comes from. And it's almost like common sense that it's not the same exact thing. But that's just one thing as well. Like vitamin C really helping support the body. I think it's also a really good, powerful coenzyme and a whole bunch of other things like the creation of dopamine. I'm not entirely sure. I'm still trying to study biophysics and all the whole, and that shit will probably take forever to fully understand. But it's very, very impactful when it comes to our immune system, as well as even just normal ascorbic acid when it comes to really down regulating a whole bunch of inflammatory markers in your body, and even at high levels using intravenous, which means inside of a like an IV inside your body at higher doses, can actually have a pro-oxidative effect compared to an antioxidative effect, which allows you to really, really have a whole bunch of different benefits, particularly when it's directly in your IVs, particularly depending on if people have like certain ailments. So that's one thing that I would say is this vitamin C, I think, is something we should dive a lot more into. Magnesium as well. That's also a very, very important thing with a lot of different chemical reactions in our body, and also just for sleep and decreasing anxiety. I would say those two are basically some things that we should supplement. Vitamin D, I don't really want to get into supplementing vitamin D. I think the best form of vitamin D is just being out in the sun, particularly early morning, getting a lot of infrared light, particularly to precondition your skin if you're going to get out in the sun during the midday, which you don't want to just do if you've never really not consistently outside. But there's a whole bunch of studies when it comes to going outside and getting better exposure to your skin, as well as direct sunlight exposure to your eyes, that really help align your circadian rhythm. But that's pretty much it for this episode of Decolonize Your Mind. If you guys think I'm kind of cool, I'm assuming if you're watching this at this far and you have not clicked off, then you're definitely a cool person. But anyways, you guys still, if you guys still think I'm cool and not batshit crazy conspiracy theorist, a crazy guy in his room just recording on a mic, even though I don't have a lot of clout so far, definitely make sure you guys like and follow. Let me know if you think there's anyone that should watch this podcast or is similar thinking and is entangled with the same vibration that we're on right now. You can just go share them this podcast, man. I'm trying to grow, man. I'm trying to make it out the bottom right now. I'm recording in my room, but eventually in the other episodes you'll see how I'm starting to evolve. I'm gonna get some better lighting, better equipment, better guests as well. So podcasts, this should be very, very fun. It sounds very cringy, but I think the only issue with podcasts right now is that there's just a lot of people talking about dumbass shit. What do you think about women going 50-50? What do you think men should do when a woman... the US is responsible for human rights violations. They're causing us to all get sick, and it's basically mass level of mind control that's taking place because we can't even function properly. And you got people talking about, what do you think women should do? Do you think a woman should serve your man? Or like, I don't even know what the fuck. I can't even think about how dumb it is. Like, if you have OnlyFans, you're not wifeable because we're being poisoned. The water's being poisoned. Our minds are being poisoned from a young age. The fluorescent lights are literally destroying us. blue lights in general are destroying us. The non-native EMFs are destroying your mitochondrial's capability to function properly, and this is why we have a whole bunch of issues and chronic diseases. And motherfuckers might think that's cringe. Oh, you just want to be different. Nigga, you're going to get sick. Your family's going to get sick if you don't fucking listen, as opposed to talking about this dumbass shit about OnlyFans. I had to come to this realization, too. I was like, bro, I don't even give a fuck about... So if some woman is tripping in my life, bro, I really don't care, bro. It's so much more important shit about that's going on in this world, where if I'm dealing with a chick and you're not aligned with whatever I'm doing, it's cool. I'm just gonna move on. There's no reason for me to be having all these conversations about, well, if a woman does this, you know she's really, bro. There is so much more important shit to go on in the world, and there's plenty of women that will just rock with you for you. Even having to listen to any of that shit is a waste of time, and that's why I'm gonna start this podcast to start talking about things that are very important. Again, that's not to put other people down, but it's just like, bro, there's so much more to this life shit than we really realize, and we're really being trapped into things that are distracting us from what's causing humanity, the U.S. or just us as a species, to really be stuck at a certain consciousness level. That's it for the podcast. Make sure you guys like if you haven't already.